Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I have to say it is an enormous honor and privilege to be an adjunct professor at BI. It is always wonderful coming to Norway. And as I said to the president this morning, and have said to many people, I think this is the most beautiful university building in the world. I think when you've worked in universities, and I travel a great deal, this is a celebration of the Enlightenment. Enlightenment in every sense of the word. Everything is so functional, it's so beautiful, it's so clean, people are polite, people are hungry for knowledge. It's a real pleasure to come to this institution. As President said, the slides are available, so you can have them later and you can steal them if you wish. Be careful, I've already stolen them, so it might not be such a good idea. I'm doing something which is very arrogant and very un-English. I'm going to show you a few of my books. I write books. And these are some of my clients. I have to be careful because some of you might not like all of them. And there we are. This is the structure of my lecture. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of work and futurology. I recommend that if you are about to retire and would like a nice well-paid job, become a futurologist. I'll explain why that is such good fun. And I'm going to look at some of the lists and the guesses and the speculations that people make. Coming over on the aeroplane yesterday, I read in the BA magazine some speculations about the future. An engineer is predicting the future in the workplace in 2020, etc. I'm going to say a little bit about the psychology of change, and then finally, one of the issues that's discussed a great deal, and that is all the stuff about Generation X, Generation Y, and what it's going to be like in the future when these generations are mixing with one another. I have a lot of slides. I'm going to go through them quite quickly and linger on others. As I say, they're all available to you straight after the lecture. Well, the first thing to say about predicting about the future is how bad people are at it. And you only have to look back to see how hopeless some people have been when they talk about futurology. So here are a few of the speculations I found. This was a man in 1896. The telephone has too many shortcomings as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no value. The light bulb, no practical value. Heavier than air machines. The Royal Society president said that heavier than air machines will never fly. What else? Everything, my favorite quote of all, 1899, everything that can be invented has been invented. Air Marshal Foch, the aeroplanes are of no use in war. Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? I think there is a world market for about 5 computers. 1943. Space travel is utter bilge. There's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. 1977. This is the problem. The problem is extrapolation is easy. You extrapolate from the present to the future based on the present. And over time, what essentially occurs is that you get greater uncertainty and it becomes pure speculation. And that's why reading the futurologists is very interesting and very amusing. But looking back, you have to think to yourself, well, how useful is futurology and speculations about the future? For instance, I was looking back, I said to my research assistant, I said, let's look back at a few things that are happening now. The introduction of online universities. The president and I and a small group had breakfast this morning. We're talking about the future of universities. Why do we have these big buildings? Why will it all not be TED in the future? Why do we need offices and buildings? Will everything be online? There are online universities. Who first said that? What else? The death of vinyl. The president is a collector of vinyl records. Who predicted the end of VHS and vinyl? Dial-up modems and internet connections being placed by... Who said that was going to happen? The Polaroid being replaced by film, which has been replaced by digital. Kodak, film, video, finished. Where's the prediction of that? Nationally specific currency, rise of so it's the Bitcoin, and the euro and other currencies. Why will we have national currencies in the future? DVDs. Who made these predictions? The post office in our country just being privatized. In Canada, I've been reading, I might be wrong, the post office being closed. You don't need post offices. Letters? Letters? What do you want letters for? Finished. Organization. The combustible engine. Is that got a future? Credit cards. How long do we need credit cards for? Purpose specific. Where are the people who have predicted this? Go back. 1990, 1995, etc. And will the fate of the workplace be different? What I'm saying is, if you look at the work of futurology, it's all very well making these big speculations, many of which haven't come true. Now, if you look at very specific issues, who has predicted them? Who has got that right? Will the lack of a need for a fixed movable desktop cause a takeover of portable devices such as laptops and tablets? I was at Heathrow yesterday. You should go into one of the lounges. Everybody is working. Why do you need an office? Why, if you have this portable technology, what will the future of the workplace be like when the centre of London, the cost of buildings and rental is extremely high? Why do you need it? Will this not change all this? Will the dawn of the cloud storage place replace USB sticks? That's already with us? Will basic computer programming become still core requirement for most jobs? Who are not computer literate? And what will their future be? Will limited contracts become the norm? We have strikes in many countries about people being on a limited contract. My university, I was asked to go on strike because of young researchers being put on limited contracts. Surely that's finished. I can remember my contract said in 1981 that I was going to retire in 2019. And you look ahead at this great distance, you think, will you be alive in 2019? And is this all possible? All these issues, everyone might have one of these limited contracts. Will low-skilled jobs be replaced by robotics? The Japanese are working harder and harder on robots and the future. So these are some of the issues and some of the questions. Now, what I have noticed is, because I was involved in this, particularly at the year 2000, people making speculations. So in 1995, I read the report of a group that made some predictions for the year 2005. The paperless office. You should come to my office if you want to see a paperless office. The paperless office. The 20-hour week. I work in the City of London for organizations, and people will do more 20 hours in less than 2 days. What else? Flights, London to LA in an hour. It takes an hour to get through customs on both sides. Astronaut food. Well, I've had some of that and don't look forward to it. And Russian hegemony. They were wrong there, weren't they? The Russians are not taking over the world, except the mafia maybe are. Here's another one. This is a very serious British group. These are making predictions for the year 2020 from the year 2000, a Millennium Report by the Henley Centre. And I've put in blue the ones I think are sort of semi-right. Shorter working hours, 25% of people working from home. That's getting there, at least in my country. Businesses working 24 hours a day. What about the banks? Why can't we shift the banks on that? Others are. Why are the universities not working 24 hours a day? Privatized automatic roads, rail renaissance, space shuttles to Sydney. Sorry, the blue is where they weren't good. Precautionary saving, virtual companies, contingent and core workers, a small group of core workers and others brought in. 1 month per annum, no work, easier commuting. Easier commuting. I live in London. Online recruitment. Definitely. I write in the Sunday Times newspaper. I write in the appointment section of this newspaper. I am going to be made redundant. The advertisements, full-page advertisements on this newspaper can cost £100,000. And it's all PR, because online recruitment is here. You don't need, this is just showing off for the organization. It's finished. Entrepreneurial renaissance, the growth of friction-free capitalism, I have to say that slowly, personal digital assistance, massive increase in PC power, community work 1 day a week. That's not like Berlusconi if you have to do this as a punishment, but if you do it as a volunteer. And global personal networks. This is 2000, in fact it's 1999, predicting the future. Well, some of this is right. And what the gurus often do is they make always the contrast. They want to contrast the old world and the new world. And this is a cheap, easy type of slide. So in the old days, it was all command and control and there was mistrust. But now we have networks and self-managed teams. There was labor and land and capital. I can remember with the dot-com boom, I can remember these companies that had nothing being valued amazingly highly. And people said, this is ridiculous compared to organizations which have great buildings, a great deal of land. And yet the argument now, it's knowledge and information and time that's valuable. Fixed, hierarchical, nomadic, etc. So these are the contrasts between the old world and the new world. And many people have done these. So the old world was wired, the new world is wireless. The old world had office hours, the new world has 24/7. The old world had corporate headquarters, etc. And do you like the last one? In the old days, there was a surplus of youth. Now, there is a surplus of wrinklies. And many people have worried about the wrinklies and what that means. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. In the old world, there were departments and discussion, and now they're flexible teams, etc., etc. You used to have to pay attention to your boss, and now you have to pay attention to customers. Well, is this true? Is this just easy, old, bad, new, good? I think it is to a large extent. I think they're trying to contrast a world that was probably never there to a world which is not here now. And I think a lot of these suppositions are interesting and amusing, but not necessarily true. Here is another report. This is 1998. Assumption about working hours. Working hours is a very interesting issue. It's a very interesting issue with European and other legislation about how long people should and work for, how long do they work efficiently. There was a big scandal in the newspapers in England for the last couple of days about people in the city being let off on Friday at 4 o'clock. I was teaching a course for Credit Suisse on Friday afternoon, and they said, what time does this end? I said 5:30, and you could see by the way they looked that 5:30 was the wrong answer. The right answer was 4 o'clock. In the City of London. So the working hours may be changing, maybe issues about how long, but how efficiently. We don't want presentism at work, we want efficiency at work. And it's how long you work for to be most efficient. There's all interesting issues about travel work, whether that is going to become a very important issue. There's many issues, of course, around global warming, the combustion engine and so forth. Travel becoming expensive, travel becoming dangerous, travel becoming difficult. Then there's issues all around communication, about how easy communication is, about how we'll be able to communicate with each other more and more efficiently. Home working, the whole idea of careers. There'll be no such thing. Tom Peters talked about this. Handy, one of our gurus, said there's no such thing as a career. But of course young people want careers. One of my very talented students was applying for a very distinguished consultancy firm. And I said to her, have you rehearsed some clever questions? And she said, like what? I said, well, I don't know. You tell me. And she said, well, one of the questions I want to ask them is about pensions. Now, this is amazing. This is a 22-year-old asking about pensions. And she's on about the career. How long do people stay here? Can you take your pension with you? And is that the new world? Was that the old world? And so you have here, again, people making assumptions about what are called mega trends. Populations are aging. I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. More economies will be returning to a steady state as opposed to the volatility. We are entering a post-American world that I think we see on a daily basis. You know, we in England, we used to run the world for about 100 years, but we got a bit tired and we said to the Americans, can you guys take over for a bit? To ensure everyone has to speak English. And the Americans agreed. But the Chinese are there and the Indians are there. And that's going to make a very big difference. What else? We've moved from an age of knowledge to an age of intelligence. I can remember I grew up in South Africa. In fact, I grew up in a town which was famous for its Norwegian settlers. I grew up on something called Oslo Beach. And what was interesting was when I went to England and I went to some great universities, I remember going to Oxford and I knew stuff. I knew a lot of stuff. I had knowledge. I was taught. The model of education I was taught, whereas the Chinese still have this model, whereas the great professors have the knowledge and they pour the knowledge into you and you leave with the knowledge. And my wife, who's cleverer than me, and started with Oxford, she said, you don't need the knowledge. You can access the knowledge. It's your critique of the knowledge. It's not getting it. It's doing something with it. And that was a big difference. A big difference that, the age of knowledge, now you want the age of intelligence, the age of critique. It's very, very easy to access knowledge. It's called Google. You can access all knowledge. It might not be accurate knowledge, but it's astonishing what you can get on Google. The question is critiquing it, making sense of that knowledge. It's now about defending your wealth rather than growing it. They say that education is out of synchrony with the job market and the changing nature of work, and you must be aware of this. As people are, my students, I teach them a certain number of skills, but are those the skills people want in the business world? What skills do business people want, and what are the skills educators are giving them? And what do we have to do to catch up? We believe that students need to be able to do certain things. They need to be able to critique, to evaluate and critique, to analyze and write. And some of the business people say, well, they can't manage. And we say, well, management is not something we teach. And we'll talk about the soft skills in a moment. What skills are the universities giving young people that the people in the workplace really want? We are watching a second major scramble for resources. You certainly see this in Africa, that the Chinese are very interested in of course, metals and so on and so forth. It's what resources you have. What else? Wars will continue to be fought as long as weapons become more sophisticated. Dictatorial regimes will become rarer, but what replaces them might not be necessarily democracy. And the whole work-life balance is now even more elusive. People talk consistently about the power of the work-life balance. It's become a bit cliched now. Some people say, I think that work-life balance is a woman's issue. I don't think it is at all, but people have said that is, what is the balance between work and life? There's no such thing as a balance. So there are other themes as well, the rise of nationalism, the continued misery of youth unemployment, very serious problem, not, I think, a problem in your country, but a problem around Europe. Very significant consequences for the young people themselves and those around them. What else? Climate change, calls for gender parity, a big issue, a very big issue. Of course, you here in Norway setting this as a wonderful example to many other countries, but the reactions of some countries where you will have a demand for so many women at such and such a level, and why this cannot be achieved and how this can be achieved, and whether this should be achieved, etc. Online education, greater diversity, less trust in institutions, come back to that as a theme. The rise of social media, of course, enormously powerful. My head of department said, we cannot contact the students anymore through email. My MSc students will not be thoroughly on email. They'll only do it on Facebook. And how long will that last? Well, they're going to move, and we're going to have to Twitter them instead of Facebook them. These are very significant changes and calls for more authenticity at work. That's a very interesting one. Let me freeze for a moment on this work by Frieser, a German psychologist. He said in the year 2000, these are my predictions, and by and large I think they're interesting. First of all, he said, there's a dissolution of the unit of work in time and space. Work is not simply a place you go to. You don't go to work. Nor is there work time and leisure time. That distinction will go. It's already going. Work is a thing you can do anywhere. It's a very serious problem. It's a problem of rumination, I was dealing with somebody the other day who, you take your work home on your Blackberries and iPhones and iPads, etc., and you never stop working, and you never stop worrying about working. And where maybe bringing that line back between work and non-work is a healthy one. I don't have a mobile phone. I've never had a mobile phone. People say, what? How can you exist? I say, I see people imprisoned by their mobile phone. I had the pleasure of meeting the Queen. As I said to the Queen, I don't like name droppers, but I had the pleasure of meeting the Queen and asking her whether she had a mobile phone. She has 3. But other people answer them. And that's the difference. Well, the interesting issue is, as I said, is work a place and a time? I think that's changing. The greater rate of innovation, the speed of change, the dramatic speed of change in the workplace, particularly with technology, that is definitely with us. He says the increasing complexity of work. We know as psychologists that as you go up, that intelligence is a very powerful predictor of success at work. Amen. Yes, emotional intelligence is important, but cognitive ability, because it's complicated. As you go up in organization, you've got to learn new stuff, and the stuff becomes harder to learn, and brighter people learn faster. And the more complex the area, the more you require intelligence. Every job, very, very few jobs are simple-minded any longer, and if they are, they're being replaced by machines. Greater global competition. Yesterday morning, I proofread one of my papers. This paper was owned by a Dutch publishing house with a Canadian editor, and I was dealing with an Indian who was using the proofing. That is the new world. That is a different world, and global competition and global integration. The development of larger and smaller units, what you see, for instance, in my world, the publishing industry. They're all buying each other up, and so you get micro-breweries. So in some worlds, they're all fragmenting into little groups, and in others, they're buying each other up. So there seems to be this tension happening a lot of the time. Changing job and career concepts. Well, he argues that people will have a quite different idea of what a job is and what sort of job you would want and whether you will have a career. More teamwork, that we cannot work on our own any longer. We are interdependent, not independent or interdependent, dependent, but interdependent. We need to work in teams, and often in virtual teams. There's going to be more reduced supervision. People are not going to supervise you in a classical sense. You can be supervised in all sorts of ways, but further away, mechanically supervised. There won't be the classical supervisor there. So when you bang your fist and say, take me to your supervisor, there won't be one. And, of course, an increase in cultural diversity. I was saying to the president, we had 22,000 Chinese students apply to my university last year. We only have 16,000 people, 22,000. And you should see, in my first year class of 102 people, there are 29 nationalities. Education is becoming massively multicultural, and with consequences, which we have to pay attention to. Okay, I'm not going to do that. This is Linda Grattan. We only have one female guru in our country, and this is her, and she's written a book about this, and you don't have to buy the book, this slide covers the book. She said, the future of work is going to be dominated by four things or five things rather. One is technological developments. Technology changes how we work. The mobile phone, the iPad, all those things change everything. My mother was a missionary, and my father started off as a printer, and he used to use hot metal. He was a hot metal printer. Completely gone. All those skills, he could read upside down, all those skills, gone. I used to be able to use semaphore when I was in the Boy Scouts. I can still send messages with flags. Why? Gone. Finished. And probably a good thing. Globalization, the BRIC countries. Bit of a problem in Brazil at the moment, but you can see the issues around globalization and what that will mean for us all. Demographic changes, I'll speak about immigration and aging in a minute. Societal trends and low carbon development. Those for her are the 5 crucial issues. I prefer the work of a man called Donkin. He also wrote a book on the future. This is an editor of the Financial Times, and he specified the following things. He talked about demographics, the demographics of an organization, the demographics of a country. You see it very dramatically in Japan. It's a very strange country compared to all others on earth. 99% of Japanese people live in Japan. The Japanese don't want and don't encourage any form of migration. The Japanese have a massive problem. Their people live very long, and it's becoming enormously expensive, and they can't get young people in certain industries. They have the demographic time bomb of all time because of their particular policies. But what this means is that people will work in different countries with different groups. I've just been working on a study on sending people abroad. Many organizations send their workers abroad. I did some work for BP and Shell trying to predict people who will adapt best in another country. It's very expensive to get a manager to work in another country, particularly if he or her takes their family, and very much more expensive if you have to repatriate them and bring them home, which is not uncommon. And this will be the norm now, the norm of working in another country. Issues of health and living longer, he thinks, are very important. How long people live, this massive crisis we have in Alzheimer's and dementia, purely as a function of people living a very long time. And who's going to pay for that? Issues around workplace and workforce that has been feminized. This is a very interesting issue. I had to give a talk in South Africa recently on teaching boys and the issue of whether schools have become feminized and a female way of doing things has replaced a male way of doing things, and what this means, and whether this is good or bad, whether it's bad for boys and good for girls or whatever. And you can tell that some workplaces have much more a female theme. There's a number of psychologists who work on cultural differences, Hofstede, Trompenaars, and others. And one of the dimensions of cultures is masculinity, femininity, and the extent to which a workplace can be feminized in the way we females tend to like to do things versus the way males like to do things. And the argument is going that in many countries there's a pressure that workplaces become feminized. That is not only that there are more females, but one does things in a female way. And what are the consequences of that? And whether that can be beneficial for all. What else? He talks about technological advances, social network changes. People will want more meaning, purpose, and authenticity in the workplace. Let me say a few things about authenticity. There's a lot of call for this. And I have a lot of doubts about this. The question is, there are three types of labor. There's intellectual labor, which most of us do. There's physical labor, that very few of us do, and should do more of perhaps. And there's emotional labor. There's the labor you have to do in the service industry. And when I came yesterday on my British Airways flight, they said, "Hello, sir. How nice to see you, sir. Welcome back, sir." Is she happy to see me? Probably not. If she's got a hangover or her boyfriend has left her, she can't be authentic. Her job is to labor emotionally. Her job is to present a particular front. My students don't want to know that something's happening in my life. My job is to behave in a particular type of way, which can be inauthentic. And there's a lot of debate around this, whether we can be ourselves in the workplace. Well, perhaps you can. In some organizations, perhaps you can. But it's a course requirement, a job requirement in some jobs, not to be authentic. Anyone who's ever done anything about this course I was running at Credit Suisse was about office politics. But the Americans have rebranded office politics as office savvy, which is a very clever way of doing things. And of course, every workplace is political, but what you want is you want people to have savvy. And one of the things you do is networking. One of the things you can do when we have our tapas lunch is networking. My wife calls it networming. A friend of mine says there's only one letter difference between networking and not working. But of course, it's a very, very important thing one does. One is able to, I think, contact other people. Now, when you're doing this, the question is, are you being authentic or are you being pragmatic? And don't have time to go down this route. But it becomes a very interesting one where people are very concerned with authenticity in the workplace. What else? Our business leaders will be under the spotlight. Anyone, and I'm sure the president knows, anyone now in any form of leadership role cannot escape anything. You can look everybody up on Google, you can know everything about, you cannot escape. Leaders are under an enormous amount of pressure because every aspect of their lives is gone through very, very carefully. In the old days, you could get away with a lot of stuff. You cannot now, which makes the leadership role much more difficult than it's ever been. The enormous pressure you put under when people are watching you, videotaping you, checking what you said in context and out of context. And that's going to make it much more difficult for leaders. There'll be changes in how people and performance are measured in the workplace. You know, the measurement of performance is a very interesting issue. I was talking to somebody yesterday about catching a bus in London. Well, if you catch a bus in London, one of the things that might amuse you is that paying the bus driver is not thought of as very important by the bus driver because he's not measured on pay, he's measured on time. And so they drive and they don't stop because that's how they're measured. They're not measured how many customers they have, they're not measured whether the customers are happy, they're not measured whether the customers pay, they're measured whether they get there on time. So they get there on time. And the question, of course, is how you measure performance and how you can easily measure performance in the workplace. What can you do differently? In some organizations, people's chairs are rated by heat and weight. So either you wait, people know whether you're on your chair or not. We've often had the lights in the office, so we can measure whether you're there or not. Not only whether you swipe your card, whether you're at your desk. Because of electronic possibilities, we can measure a lot more. We can scrape things off the web. Nice Mr. Snowden has taught us of how many people are scraping things off the web. But there's great possibilities of changing the way you measure performance. Okay, let me say a few things about older workers. Psychologists have been very interested in this, and this is part of the age surge. What can older workers do or not do? Well, I think one of the difference is as older workers are thought to be more careful, reliable, knowledgeable, and socially skilled. I was at a hotel recently, and the thing that struck me, I looked around, and nearly every one of the serving people were older than me, which is a bit of a surprise. Usually it's young foreigners in hotels. And so I went up to the manager and I said, "Can I speak to you about your selection procedure?" He looked a bit worried. I said, "Everyone's," he said, "Oh yes, we only select people over 60. I said, "Why?" He said, "They pitch up. They arrive." He said, they're a bit slower. Everyone likes them. They're like their granny, as it were. But they are better, more reliable, happier people. They have a work ethic from the past. And they're selected for it. And some organizations very deliberately choose people like that because they have some of the older values. Well, what can't older workers do so effectively? Psychologists make a distinction between what is crystallized intelligence, which is knowledge, which is crosswords, which is information, versus fluid intelligence, which is problem solving, which is Sudoku. And older workers are not good at that. So they're they're poorer memories, poor information, poor processing strategies, and they're not as good as you, I'm sure, know on some of the new technologies. Whereas the experience helps older workers. Some of those early experiences. I was reading a paper recently in a journal. It was a very interesting paper. They got 100 very successful American leaders. And they said, looking back at your career, looking back at all the things that happened to you, which was the most important for your development? Was it doing an MBA at Harvard? Was it having a coach? What was it? And the answer? They were given early stretch assignments. The organization gave them an assignment which was quite difficult and stretched them. And secondly, if they failed, it was thought of as a learning opportunity, not as a failure. And that was very important. It was experiential, and the power of experience rather than the power of education, as it happens. Well, older people can come back to this. My mother died 2 years ago, and her lawyer was 81. Am I worried about her lawyer being 81? No. He still had the knowledge to do what it did. And he had the experience of dealing with those issues. Under what conditions are older young people similar and different? Well, younger people do better with complex information. And are there age differences in learning? Yes, older people tend to be a bit slower and they tend to have lower educational opportunities. But the question becomes, what can you use older people? Do you get less creative as you get older? We were talking about this during breakfast. The answer is no. The data suggests, at least in the arts, many composers, many artists have done better as they've got older. So the question is, what is it? What one has to ask. What characteristics get worse over time? Another big issue is alternative work arrangements. So for instance, is part-time employment. People going part-time, whether that's a good thing. If you ask me, if I had the choice of one full-time or two part-time people, I always choose two part-time. You get more work out of two part-time than you do out of one full-time. Contingent workers are those you just call in for certain issues. Flexi-time. Compressed working weeks. Very interesting. We have in London a congestion charge. We have charge for everything. It costs £2,500 to park your car at the university. Probably the same here. So some people come in, our support staff have 4-day weeks. So they do 4 12-hour days as opposed to 5 10-hour days. They come in before the charge and they leave after the charge. Is that good for them and is that good for us? Is a compressed week good about the quality of time? Yeah, it's a possibility now. The question is whether it's healthy. And the people I speak to, the support staff, don't like it. They choose to do it for financial reasons, but it's not good for the quality of the work. And then there's, of course, the whole issue of teleworking. And teleworking, people working from home, very interesting issue, very interesting problem in many countries about whether you should allow people, whether they are effective doing work from the home place, whether they can be parts of a different team. 26% of Americans work from home. But there's interesting consequences. The story I like most of all is a story which happened last year in the British newspapers. And this man put an advertisement and he said, I used to like the office Christmas party. I work from home. There's a pub in the village. I will hire the top room of that pub. You come along and pay £5 if you work from home, and we will have a little party. And the story goes, I make up the details, 30 people came to the party. They had a wonderful time. Now they meet every month as a support group. Because what you want, we are social animals. Working from home is all very good, but you miss out on the gossip. You miss out on what's going on. And the social aspect is very important. And so the workspaces of the future, cubicles and caves and hoteling and moteling and guesting, does this work? I was at British Airways, and to find a room is very difficult. When you find a room to do work, and what do you have to book in and how do you contact people? Okay, so there are lots of pressures facing organizations. Let me spend a little time on soft skills. I went to a lecture in Dubai when I was under the Ash crowd, and the guru, he was a real guru, said there are only 3 types of jobs: technical jobs, supervisory jobs, and strategic jobs. You are selected for your technical knowledge. You go and learn stuff. You become an engineer, or you become an accountant, or you become a psychologist, or you become something, and that technical skill gets you to the job. And then, what do they do to you if you're successful? They promote you into what? Not doing the job. Because you're a brilliant engineer, they stop you becoming a brilliant engineer and say, go manage the engineers. Go motivate the team. So you get to the job with hard skills, and then you need the soft skills. And the soft skills are the people skills. And the question is, to what extent are the people skills absolutely fundamental in the workplace? To what extent are people skills more fundamental than technical skills? I don't believe the experts on emotional intelligence when they say that emotional intelligence is more important than intellectual intelligence. I don't believe that, but I do accept and recognize that emotional intelligence, social skills, soft skills are really, really important at work. And the higher you go, the more they're important. The question is, can you teach them? And where do you get them from? And do young people have more or less of them? I was in Dubai, no, I was in Oman doing some work there, and the boss called me and said, "Excuse me, can I speak to you for a moment?" This is very worrying when you're a psychologist, because it's usually something like, "My wife doesn't understand me," or, you know, "My child is wetting his bed," or something. "Can you help me?" And he said, "There is a problem," he said. "The chief drilling engineer, he doesn't have emotional intelligence." So I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, can you give it to him?" You know, you take emotional intelligence and you pour some emotional intelligence in the chief drilling engineer. And he didn't have the skills, and he was a lovely man. He was an educated, charming man. He liked going to deserts and drilling for oil. He didn't like sitting in a room, motivating a team. He didn't have that approach, didn't have those skills. And the question is the relevance of soft skills in the future. And so the question also is about young people in the workplace. I am enormously fortunate. I think I have the best job in the world. I think an academic, you might not think so, but I think the academic world is by far the best. I have all sorts of wonderful things. I have autonomy. I have lots of control over my time. In my world, you've got to deliver stuff, but how and where and when you deliver it is a different thing. I can write books on any topic I'm interested in. But most of all, I am surrounded by young, enthusiastic, forward-looking, positive people. If you want to stay young, boys and girls, spend your time with them. I spend all my time with my PhD students, not with my old, sour, aggressive, nasty colleagues, with my cut. But with the young people. The question is, what are they like? Are they different? Are young people different than they used to be? And I'll say a little bit about this in the end. Well, young people, what are the positive things? They have a higher level of self-confidence. It's quite dramatic in some instances, though some of it is not true. They seem very well educated and comfortable with technology. I don't know about you, but I'm about the level of about a 9-year-old now with technology, because 9-year-olds have caught me up, and every year I get younger. I'm going to an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old. They're very, very good with this. They accept multiculturalism, open-minded and tolerant, have none of the baggage from the past on these issues. They have a global worldview. They're connected 24 hours a day. They're proactive and get involved, and they're sensitive to and willing to social justice. They do a lot of social justice talk. Good news. But is that all? What about the bad news? Well, they're more cynical about bosses and business. And they don't trust you. If you're in business, then you are exploiting people in one. You're manipulative and exploiting people. All of you, whatever business you're in. They're alienated from the wider society. To some extent, they might be connected electronically, but they don't have a sense of community like an older generation had. They're less motivated to go to work and do work while with their work is something you do. It's not central anymore. It's part of the life story, but it's not as central. They're more prone to psychological illnesses. We had, I think, 29% of students claiming they were either dyslexic or depressed. They're dyslexic because they get an extra half an hour in the exam, so that's quite clever. But depressed. More and more sit their exams in a health centre. Having less respect for the institutions of society and office holders in them. All institutions have lost their sense of trust in young people. They are cynical about the new world. Well, here's Forbes magazine early this year. I got this down. He said these are the millennials. These are the young people. What are they? How are they influencing? They will force companies to be more transparent. They want you to be more open about everything. More open about salaries, more open about promotions, more open on all those issues which we used to be able to keep quiet. They will not allow us to do that. They will choose corporate cultures and meaningful work above everything else. That is why they all want to go to Google. They all want to go to these new, sexy, startup places where everywhere is genes and there's no hierarchy. That is what they want to do. I used to be with the students, the very British, the cleverest of all the British students, and there was always 3 jobs they wanted: the city, the BBC, or diplomacy, the diplomatic service. All of them are less sexy than they used to be. Don't want those anymore. They want startup, exciting, that sort of world. very important for them. They want to build collaborative organizations, he says. They will make working from home the norm. It is not an exception, it is average, and they will work from home as opposed to just spend time off. They will recruit based on results over degrees. It really doesn't matter whether you have a degree, where you have a degree from, whether it's a good degree or not. It's what you can do. My wife phoned me up recently and she said, I've got 2 candidates for an IT job. One has got a master's degree and is very good. The other has no qualifications but is amazingly enthusiastic. Who should I take? I said, there's no doubt about this. Take the enthusiast. Select for attitude, train skills. Don't select for skills, train attitude. What else? They will change the meaning of FaceTime. FaceTime is where you contact people face to face. How frequently that is done. They will encourage generosity and community support. They will eliminate the annual performance review. Take it away. I'm very worried about this. I think one of the greatest powers you have of changing organizations is through performance management. Whether you have a review or not is a different matter. Every organization doesn't think its performance management review works, but they're going to change all that, he says. They will take away the review. It'll be based on something else. They will turn work into a game instead of a chore, and they will level corporate hierarchies. There will not be hierarchies like this. There will be hierarchies like that. And they say, one of the good metaphors is the orchestra. The orchestra is what the organizations will look for in the future, because there's very few hierarchies in orchestra. If you think of an orchestra, it's divided into 3 groups: bangers, scrapers, and blowers. So you have bangers, scrapers, and blowers, and there's only 2 people. The head, the CEO, is the man with the stick, and there's a number 2 who's a scraper, and that's it. 58 people all respond, or all directed by one. Very flat organizations. This is the organization of the future. And of course, mobile technology. Is it an obsession? 40% of European 7-year-olds have mobile phones. There are 50 countries in the world where there is more than 1 mobile phone per person. And that includes Zaire. Surprised me. Students check their phones on average 60 times a day. If you watch them, if you ever sit in a lecture and sit behind them with their laptops up, you see them checking their mobiles and whatever. They send 100 texts a day. The bright side, they're more available and connected. They use apps very well, smartphones. Tomorrow, I'm a bit worried. I've got to go to Paris. The taxis in London are having a strike. The black taxis are having a strike because there's a new app called Uber. Have you heard about this new app? This new app, think of this as a little... British taxi drivers are quite unique in the world because they do the knowledge. And the knowledge is they put into their heads the map of London. And you have the right to say to any taxi driver at any time, take me to so-and-so, without looking up anything. He should be able to take you there the fastest route because it's in his head. And I say his because most of them are men. Very high percentage of them are men. Think of this. Why do you need this? Why do you need this when you've got sat-nav? And furthermore, they cruise around, and this app is going to destroy them. The app, sat-nav and the app, the technology has changed that job completely, and they're very, very cross. And we have the most expensive taxis in the world, and they know that they're going to lose out on this. This is an example of the change of technology. An app, young people using this Uber app, which is incredible. I watched somebody use it yesterday. I'm going to try and use it myself. Okay. And the dark side, sexting, text bullying, distracting, whatever. So, how am I doing? Oh, I'm almost on time. Where have I got to? Quick summary. Predictions about the future are very unreliable. When you want a specific prediction, by and large, if you look back, people are not very good. We do know, and it is true, that there are technological changes, that there are legal changes that influence people in the workplace. It is quite apparent that societies are becoming more cosmopolitan, much more multicultural. It's becoming apparent that the old order in many ways is changing, that new technology has opened up new things. And this, of course, will fundamentally change the nature of work. I've talked about young people and old people. The issue that many people are talking about is this issue about millennials, these X generation, Y generation. And if you were born at a certain time, you have the philosophy and attitudes and beliefs and values of your cohort. And that somehow, if you were born in 1970, you're different from you were in 1969 because you belong to a different generation. And that therefore, these people will have to be managed differently. That if you are working with 20-year-olds, it's going to be very different from working with 50-year-olds because of their beliefs. And of course, there's been a lot of work on these generational beliefs, and there are misunderstandings. Well, I was asked to give a talk about this, and so I went to Google, as one does. I bought about 8 books on this. There are many books on these generational differences, and had a look at them, and had a look at what they say, and then, fortunately, and I'll show you this in a minute, I looked for the evidence of what they say. Because a lot of these books make interesting assumptions and very dramatic assumptions, but not always based on much evidence. So the question is, to what extent are misunderstandings at work attributed to generational differences? Say, oh, these people don't get on because they belong to this young generation and they belong to an older generation. Therefore, these misunderstandings are not, we used to say, a personality clash, but a generation clash. To what extent is that true? Is the rising attrition rates linked to generation differences? The people leave organizations. There's a high turnover in many organizations. Because young people say, I'm not going to stay here for life. This is ridiculous. You don't have a job for life. I come here for the experience. 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 6 years, and then I move on. And that's why they go. Is that a generational issue? Can we fix some of these problems if they exist? Is your culture informed primarily by a baby boomer generation? I was asked to give a talk for a big London bank, and they said the problem with this organization is that everything here, all the values, the way we do things, is all based on these old people, called the baby boomer generation, of which I'm one, and that most of the people now are not the baby boomer generation, so you have a corporate culture which doesn't doesn't echo the values of this younger generation. And this is causing all of our problems. Does the current corporate culture alienate those from a different generation? The way we do things is inappropriate. Well, what are the different generations? There's an education difference. Young people tend to be better educated. They have earlier work experiences. They haven't had experiences of wars and migration, which can shape people very powerfully. We're celebrating at the moment in Great Britain the D-Day landings. And when you talk to people from a generation who've been at war, you see the power of those effects. Economic conditions, booms and busts. Yes, most young people have been through some of these, but not necessarily. And cultural and family influences. So these are the factors which make young people different. And what are the areas of generational conflict? What about the work ethic? Is the work ethic different? I have written a book on the Protestant work ethic and very interested in the work ethic. You, from, of course, a great Puritan northern Protestant culture, we know that the Protestant countries of Europe are still richer than the Catholic countries of Europe, that the Protestants of America are richer than the Catholics of America. And to what extent one can attribute this to the work ethic, the ethic of working hard and the ideas of Weber, that work is for God's glory, that being successful in this life is a sign of God's grace, blah, blah, blah. Do the young people have a different work ethic? Is it patent that they don't care as much with work? Is this true? Dedication, industriousness, frugality, asceticism, postponement of gratification, all those fundamental aspects of the work ethic, have the young people lost them? Every so often you see a politician saying, well, the trouble with the young people is there's no work ethic. Well, I've taught young people for 35 years. It's not true. It is with some, but it always was with some. Organizational hierarchies. To what extent does this cause power? This issue around authority, around hierarchy. Well, in some organizations, I teach the British military. All military in the world are the same. They're very hierarchical. Why? Because they're based on another Weberian idea, span of control. You cannot control, you cannot lead anything above a certain number. So you have sergeants and lieutenants and captains and majors and colonels and brigadiers, etc., all logically by unit. And yet young people don't, of course they don't mind this, if it has a sense to it. What else? Dealing with change, that they're much better at dealing with change or whatever. Managing, exploiting, and exploring technology. Certainly, that becomes more interesting. I have to ask my students about what I don't know. I cannot be a technical engineer any longer. I cannot predict the technical future. I don't know it enough to see what opportunities there can be. And my students have put me on Facebook and put me on Twitter, and I use both. And the question is, to what extent these things, their literacy, really helps in this area. Organizational loyalty and trust. Do they believe or trust in the organization any longer? Whatever that organization is. And rights versus responsibilities. Okay, my time is coming up, so I must move forward. So, the new generation of the future, as I said, well-educated, we've done that one. What are the baby boomers? My generation, optimistic, team-oriented, personal gratification, involvement, personal growth, adaptation. The baby boomers, it is said, derive their success from identity and respect. Work defines you. You are what you do. I should know. I'm a psychologist. Can you imagine the problem of what people at cocktail parties, they say, what do you do? And if you say you're a professor of psychology, you get one of three reactions. Reaction number one is, oh, that's very interesting. Number two is, really? Do you believe in that nonsense? And number three is, oh, good, because I want to tell you about my wife, etc., etc. So I had to do this yesterday. When I'm on an aeroplane, I say I teach geography at a school, and I don't have this particular problem. The generation is the generation of amassing skills. Generation always want to make a difference. Okay, let me move on. I haven't got time for this. I'll show you the data, and we'll go forward. There have been two studies, two very big studies, two very good studies. And they've actually asked the question, this is based on empirical data, evidence-based management. Not the plural of anecdote is not evidence. Writing popular books with good stories doesn't give you evidence. And in-company reports is not evidence. This is empirical, disinterested data. Here's study number one, Journal of Business and Psychology. The pattern of results indicated the relationships between generational membership and work-related outcomes are moderate to small, essentially zero in many cases. Differences that appear to exist are likely attributable to factors other than generational membership. A study just out. Generational differences in the workplace. Popular stereotypes suggest that generational differences among workers present challenge the workplace managers. However, existing empirical research provides mixed evidence for generational differences in important values. It appears that the effects of generational membership on workplace behavior are not as strong as suggested by commonly held stereotypes. The bottom line is, the stuff about generational differences isn't true. It's not there. Yes, there are some, but it's not that strong, in the sense that if you belong to a certain age group, you come to work with a whole different set of values, hopes, and expectations. It's not true. Yes, aging does change you. It changes some of your abilities, but it doesn't mean that these are different tribes and that they do things quite differently. Okay, let me draw this to conclusion. What predicts the future of career success? What allows people to be successful in the workplace? I think there are a number of factors here. The first one is bright, smart, clever, whatever it is. We know from the data, and this will continue to be the case, probably even more the case, that intelligence, cognitive ability, being smart counts a great deal. It counts a great deal in more complicated jobs, and jobs are getting more complicated. We don't like that message. We don't like the message because it's an embarrassing message and it requires the assessment of abilities. All American universities, you can tell the quality of an American university just like this, because they all base their intake on SATs, on aptitude tests, scholastic aptitude tests. So the quality of an American university is perfectly correlated with the cutoff point of SATs. It's called intelligence testing. Intelligence people do better. Amen. Next. Hardworking, conscientious, organized, focused, reliable. We know that of the personality variables, conscientiousness is the most important. It predicts everything. It predicts longevity, it predicts success at work, it predicts marital success, it predicts hugely powerful variable. And this is a thing that doesn't necessarily change with the generations. It is a powerful predictor in the workplace. Next, adjusted, reliable, resilient people who can take the pressure do better. The two psychological variables that predict everything are neuroticism and conscientiousness. High on conscientiousness, low on neuroticism. Tough, resilient people who can take the strain and who work hard, do better, always, everywhere, and always will. Charm, EQ, IQ, social skills. Soft skills is important stuff. You need the soft skills in dealing with other individuals. And finally, there's the issue of integrity and honesty. And this is an issue which I think is coming to the fore more and more. The issue is trying to evaluate people's integrity and honesty and sense of right and wrong and how important this is. So, no matter what generation you are, do you pitch up and pitch in? Are you a team player? And are you to be trusted? Those are the things that count. So, yes, the time and the place and the circumstances you grew up in does affect you and the way in which you work, think, and play. I've just finished a book called Revealed. And this book is about what you can scrape off the web to understand a human being. So how can you select people, how can you interact with people, how can you predict people's behavior from what you can read about them? We've got lots of case studies. We've got an interesting case study about Mr. Snowden. It's a very interesting and complicated individual. Studies on Steve Jobs, who was even more complicated and horrible in many ways. And the question we're asking is to what extent you can understand an individual from this information. But we always start with the culture in which they grew up, the national culture and the family culture, because of course that flavors the way you look at the world. And I accept that totally, that you see the world through the eyes of your national culture and through the eyes of your family culture, which might not be the same as the national culture. And yes, that does shape the way in which you see the world and in which you go to work. But it's not the only factor, and that's the most important one. But there are more important factors that shape your attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, likability. And these are your abilities of one sort or another. So, this is no excuse for not having good conversations at work. What people have in common is that they're very different, but they have similar views and what they want from their manager. In other words, young people go to work wanting exactly the same things that you did. I don't think there's any difference. I think young people want the same from their teachers, they want the same thing from their managers that everybody does. They want respect, they want a sense of equity, they want some direction, they want a sense, and they want feedback. I say to people, there are three things you need to do as a good manager. You need to be able to set goals and tasks and challenges and KPIs or whatever stuff. They need to be clear about what they're supposed to do. They want feedback on how they're doing, and they want support for doing that. And that's always been the case and always will be the case. And I don't think there are systematic differences any longer. I think there are issues around self-awareness and management. So let me bring this to a conclusion. I'm sorry to rush at the end, but I'm going to give you time to ask me some questions. Speculating about the future is enormous fun. It's easy to do. If you want to be very successful, then you've got to be very dramatic. So you've got to talk about the end of nation states and the end of democracy and the end of coinage and the end of the post office. They come in two sorts. There's the optimist and the pessimist. The pessimist says everything's getting worse, everything's collapsing, the world you know is never going to be the same. And so you leave feeling anxious. And the other says it's all going to get a lot better, there's going to be robots doing everything, and we're going to discover even more oil, and we never have to work again, and we're going to sit at home in our pajamas and do work. And both of them are wrong. And both of them are shown not to be very good. I think predicting the future at work is very problematic, particularly with technology. Two, there are some themes, some very clear themes coming through about generation, not about the aging workforce, about changes in technology, about changes in expectations. But I think equally that when you look at the literature and you look at the way people are managed, and here we are at a business school, and you ask me the question, will managing and leading people in the future be very different from what it was in the past? My answer is no. And that's not just because I'm an old wrinkly. It's because I think that the fundamentals of leadership and management are not changing from generation or from group to group or from culture to culture. I think they are fundamental, they always have been and they always will be. Thank you.